Hello, my name is Reva Bhalla, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Reggie Thompson. So, Reggie, when I've been looking at just the world in a longer time frame, and we've been very focused on Eurasia in general, that's where a lot of conflict has been concentrated as of late, but it's also where the United States has been hitting wall after wall, right? We have a giant migrant crisis that's threatening the European project, and it's really hard to get countries to willingly accept more migrants into their borders. At the same time, you have Turkey willing to take a bunch of concessions, but it has its own plans for northern Syria that are blocked by Russia. Russia's waiting for concessions on sanctions. And then those concessions relate back to Ukraine, and we see major political obstacles in Kiev. In short, it's a mess, and there are no easy breakthroughs. And that, of course, is where the United States' attention has been very much absorbed. But when we shift over to the region you cover, Latin America, when I look at it from the longer term view, things look pretty good overall. How are you seeing it?
Yes, definitely. There's more. We have a more positive assessment of what's going on in Latin America as far as it relates to the United States than, say, Eurasia, where there's a lot more political stumbling blocks, and just generally the U.S. has a harder time in imposing its will upon individuals and states there. In Latin America, the situation really is going to be very benign in the near future for the United States. A lot of the leftist states that we observed rising up over the last 10 to 15 years and really becoming kind of a thorn in the side of the United States to some degree, as in they oppose regional initiatives and U.S. policies in the region. They never really became a direct threat to the United States, obviously, but they were sort of stumbling blocks to U.S. policy in the region, particularly Venezuela. However, now we're starting to see that leftist wave of populist leaders facing some setbacks. To a large degree, this is because of the end of the commodity boom that was driven by China. As we see Chinese demand growth slowing down, we're seeing the effects on a lot of these economies here, and they have less patronage revenue to really distribute among their followers, as we've observed so clearly in Venezuela.
And I mean, not just Venezuela, but we see it across the region. I mean, Argentina under Macri is restructuring itself, and there will be, of course, pain that comes with that, but it's definitely on a very new path. And we see Brazil taking its anti-corruption campaign very seriously. That means a lot of political volatility in the near term, but I think in the long run, Brazil is going to be stronger for it. And then across the region, from Ecuador to Bolivia, we see populist leaders facing a lot more challenges to their own political survival. But as you said, Venezuela really was the bastion of this wave of populism and the sort of Bolivarian revolution that Chavez touted. And if Venezuela is the center of gravity of that trend, and Venezuela is the one in the most immediate crisis, then naturally our attention has been very much concentrated there. So let's talk about Venezuela. What are we looking for now as we're tracking this crisis and looking for the next steps of it to the break point? How are we defining that break point, and what's leading up to it?
So at this point, what we're looking for in the next few months is how successful efforts to remove President Nicolas Maduro are from the opposition and from within his own government, and really what direction the social crisis that is really growing in Venezuela right now takes. So it's an economic crisis that has turned into more or less a social crisis because there is a severe lack of food in some areas. There's simply rampant inflation that is increasingly putting basic food products out of regular people's reach. And so whether or not that spurs unrest in the near term, that is to say in the next few months, is going to be something very important to watch, because that unrest could morph into a significant threat for the president. Really, that if unrest pops up in the streets in the near term, it could influence what the military and what other politicians within the ruling United Socialist Party of Venezuela consider their political priorities to be. And one of their political priorities at this point is really trying to deflect public anger away from themselves. And really getting rid of Maduro in the short term is something that is becoming more and more plausible.
And so that's where the focus will be. I mean, economically, the situation is looking worse and worse. We're expecting a default likely in October at this point. But when it comes to the social unrest factor, we're even looking just upcoming protests that the opposition itself is now ready to take to the streets.
Yes, the opposition's one of many factions in the country really trying to impose their will on the government. You've got the opposition right now calling for demonstrations as part of their mechanisms to try to get Maduro out of office. The other options are a constitutional amendment and a constitutional referendum initiative. Now, the president can block the referendum or the amendment initiatives through the use of the Supreme Court, through the National Electoral Council, but the risk of protest is something that really keeps him up at night, so to speak. It's the kind of thing that's going to potentially, if the opposition can draw large crowds out onto the street, it will influence the really the point of view of other actors in the country, such as the military, such as other PSUV politicians, towards the president and whether or not they want to remain loyal to him.
Right, and that's what could accelerate the timeline, is if we see that social unrest reach a point to where the case for intervention is made, it will fall on the military to carry that out. I think the military still seems very divided on whether that's something they want to do, and still wanting to stay within constitutional bounds. But again, social unrest is not something that's easily controlled. And certainly the conditions are there in Venezuela where people are very desperate. They're not getting their basic supplies. And that is the situation that could easily overwhelm Venezuela's military and something they're going to want to preempt. So a lot more to come on that. This is an issue we'll be covering in some detail in our second quarter forecast. But Reggie, thank you for your coverage on Venezuela and the region at large. And thank you all for joining.